My name is Delaney Harper, 32, the youngest daughter whom most people in the Harper family in Alpharetta, Georgia don't even remember exists. 2 weeks before Christmas, a private text from my mother lit up my phone. Christmas this year will just be true family. Hope you understand. I stared at those words for 30 seconds, set the phone down, opened the Truist Private Wealth app, and rerouted every single automatic payment tied to the $6 million lake house. Mortgage, taxes, HOA, power, water. The credit cards they maxed out every December. Gone from the old joint account, now pulling from a new one only I could see. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I just watched the little green active switches stay green for now and felt the same quiet click inside my chest. They thought the house was theirs. They thought the money just appeared. They were about to find out who had really been keeping the lights on for the last 9 years. If you've ever been told even once that you don't belong at your own table, stay with me. This one gets good. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're not going to believe what happened when the first bill bounced on Christmas morning. 2 weeks before Christmas, I was curled up on the couch in my quiet midtown apartment, scrolling through nothing in particular, when the mail slot clattered and a thick cream envelope slid across the hardwood like it owned the place. Gold foil lettering, deckled edges, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. I recognized the style immediately. Kendall Harper, my 35-year-old sister, had finally sent the official invitation to her summer wedding, and every line of the enclosed card made it clear: the ceremony, the reception, the sunset photos on the dock, the string quartet, the 10-tier cake. All of it would happen on the sprawling back lawn of the Lake Lanier house the family had lived in for the last 12 years, the same house currently being transformed into a winter wonderland while everyone pretended I no longer existed. I left the envelope on the counter for a long time, the glossy photograph of the dock at golden hour staring up at me like it was daring me to feel something. That house had never truly felt like mine, not in the way bedrooms and childhood memories are supposed to feel. Yet, it had been owned by Grandpa Curtis Harper's revocable living trust since the week I turned 20, with me secretly named successor trustee and sole beneficiary the moment he passed. Grandpa had insisted on driving me himself to Wells Carter's office in his rattling old silver Lexus, telling me the only way to protect what he had built from people who loved spending more than earning was to put the one person they overlooked in charge the day he was gone. I was a junior in college then, surviving on vending machine coffee and part-time payroll gigs, so his words felt exaggerated, almost theatrical. I signed where the notary told me to sign, thanked him for the ride, and shoved the whole experience to the back of my mind. Until this evening. I walked to the hallway closet, dragged down the heavy fireproof box he had handed me the same day, with instructions never to let anyone else open it, and punched in the 6-digit code he made me repeat until it was muscle memory. Beneath the recorded trust certification and a stack of savings bonds sat one sealed manila envelope with my name, written in his trembling but unmistakable handwriting. Taped to the front was an old brass key and a folded note that read, "Only open this when they finally show you who they really are." I broke the wax seal for the first time in more than 10 years. The supplemental trust amendment was dated 8 weeks before he died, written in language so clear even a first-year law student could follow it. It made me successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the Lake Lanier property, 12% of Harper Homes, and the dedicated Truist Private Wealth account that had been quietly paying every single expense for the past 9 years, an account no one else even knew existed. A separate handwritten letter laid out the rest: keep every utility, every property tax escrow, every HOA fee, every insurance premium, even the family platinum cards on auto-draft from that trust account, then keep my mouth shut until the day they forced my hand. Grandpa had watched them for 78 years. He knew exactly how the story would end, and he wanted me ready when it did. I closed the box, slid it back onto the highest shelf where no one ever looked, and turned my attention to Kendall's invitation again. For 9 years, I had quietly covered every single expense on that $6 million property, close to $200,000 a year, after taxes and insurance alone money I earned in a job they never bothered to ask about money. I never mentioned money they spent on private jets to Aspen, on college funds for nieces and nephews. I barely knew on designer gowns. And now, on a wedding, they were planning on land the trust owned, not them. They posted stories of the decorated mantel, the fresh wreaths delivered from Vermont, the catering deposits, tagging one another, laughing in the captions about Harper family traditions that somehow never included the youngest daughter who paid the electric bill so the lights would stay on for those pictures. I ran my thumb across the raised lettering that spelled out the date, and the address, feeling something inside me shift from a dull ache to absolute icy clarity. They wanted to decide who counted as true family. I was done letting them do it with my money and my silence. The morning 2 days before Christmas, I woke up earlier than I had in months, brewed a single cup of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and opened the Truist Private Wealth app I had not touched since the last tax quarter. One by one, I rerouted every recurring payment tied to the Lake Lanier house to a new account, only I controlled, then sat back and waited for the notices to roll in. Christmas Eve itself was still perfect. The 14-foot Fraser fir glowed, the heater hummed, the Sub-Zero hummed louder. They posted their stories like nothing had changed. But on December 26th, the past due notices began arriving. January 20th. Georgia Power cut the electricity. January 25th. The water stopped. February 1st. The HOA disabled every gate transponder and placed a lien for 2 quarters of unpaid dues. That night, Heather Harper. My mother had filled 2 carts with prime rib lobster tails cases of vintage champagne, and every overpriced side dish the store offered, when every card she slid came back declined. The cashier asked her to try again. The machine kept flashing the same red message. People in line shifted their weight, checked phones, pretended not to notice the woman in the camel cashmere coat turning the color of the poinsettias behind her. She finally wheeled both carts to the side and called Brody from the parking lot under the strung holiday lights voice, climbing with every word. Brody tried his corporate card at the Shell station on Windward Parkway and watched the pump shut off after 4 gallons. He called the bank, spent 20 minutes on hold listening to the same 6-song holiday playlist, only to be told the trust had removed authorization effective immediately. He dialed me 6 times in a row. I let every call roll to voicemail. By the time they got home, the security gates refused to recognize the transponder because the HOA account was locked, and when they finally punched in the manual code and rolled up the long driveway, every light in the 6-bedroom house was dark. The indoor temperature was already dropping fast. Kendall walked straight to the kitchen island, opened the Sub-Zero to grab a bottle of water, and discovered the faucets only coughed air. Dean tried to reboot the entire smart home system from his phone and realized every connected device had been logged out permanently. Kendall stood in the marble foyer clutching her phone and the leather wedding binder she carried everywhere, tears finally spilling over when she realized the caterer needed final approval on the tent permit by morning, and the property no longer had power, water, or a functioning address for deliveries. She left me 3 voicemails that escalated from confusion to hysteria. I listened to none of them. I turned my phone face down, poured a second glass of wine, and watched the snow start to fall over Midtown from 15 miles away, knowing the temperature inside that lake house was still dropping, and the first real Christmas they had experienced in years had only just begun. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of quiet that only settles when a house full of people suddenly has nothing left to say to each other. The first official call came December 26th from Truist, the bank holding the home equity line Brody had pulled against the trust property several years earlier. The loan officer spoke in the measured tone people use when they know bad news is coming. The latest payment had not posted, the grace period had expired, and unless $28,000 appeared within 30 days, they would file a demand letter and begin the foreclosure clock. May saw the foreclosure advertisement published in the Forsyth County Legal Organ exactly as Georgia law requires. The first Tuesday in October, 9 months after the first missed payment, the sheriff's sale took place on the courthouse steps in Cumming. That spring and summer they tore the house apart looking for answers. Heather emptied every file drawer in Brody's study, scattering closing documents, old appraisals, and paid-off car titles across the hardwood, while Kendall followed behind, picking up pages and reading them aloud in a voice that kept cracking on every other word. Dean hauled down boxes from the attic that had not been touched since Grandpa Curtis died, coughing through dust as he flipped through folders labeled Lake Lanier and Personal and Miscellaneous. They found the original trust certification, the refinances in 2014 and 2017 that only needed the trustee's signature, the tax receipts that showed payments made like clockwork, everything except the one document that actually mattered. Brody finally located the recorded trust documents in a fireproof safe he swore he had never seen before, tucked behind old life insurance policies and a stack of war bonds. When he opened it under the flashlight of his dying phone, my name sat right there as successor trustee with full authority the moment Grandpa passed. The notary seal belonged to Wells Carter, the same attorney who still sent me birthday cards every year like clockwork and who had never once breathed a word. None of them had ever noticed. None of them had ever thought to ask why the youngest kid who never came home was quietly paying for everything. They sat in a circle on the living room rug, surrounded by decades of paper, the Christmas tree long dead, and realized for the first time that the house they were fighting to keep warm with space heaters had never legally belonged to them at all. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear, and I asked Wells Carter to meet me at the little coffee shop on Avalon Boulevard that still had its Christmas lights up even though the holiday was technically over. He walked in wearing the same navy topcoat he had owned for 20 years, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. We took the corner table by the window, ordered 2 black coffees, and he slid a thick envelope across the table without ceremony. Inside were the originals I had never shown anyone, the codicil Grandpa Curtis signed in the hospital 2 weeks before he passed the trust amendment that named me sole successor trustee, and the separate page that made everything irreversible. Wells had arranged for the rest of the family to receive certified copies that same afternoon, so by the time the sun went down, they already knew the house belonged to the trust I controlled, and that the 12% of Harper Homes had been mine since the day Grandpa died. What they did not know yet was the last piece. Reese Harper walked in 10 minutes later, 28 years old, tall the way Brody had been at that age, with the same dark hair and the same jawline no one could miss once it was pointed out. He wore a simple black sweater and carried nothing except a smaller version of the same envelope. He pulled out the chair next to Wells, nodded once at me, and waited. I had met Reese exactly 3 times before, once when Grandpa introduced us on my 21st birthday, once when he flew in for the funeral, nobody told the rest of the family about, and once when we signed the paperwork that put 5% of the company in his name the week he graduated college. Grandpa had insisted on both of us his only insurance policy against the people who had spent decades pretending blood was the only thing that mattered. Reese laid his copy of the trust amendment on the table between us. 17% total between the two of us was enough to call an emergency shareholders meeting. We did in January. The vote took 12 minutes. Brody and Dean removed as officers. Harper Homes sold to a Charlotte-based buyer for $48 million cash. Clean, legal, final. Across town, in the house that no longer had heat or hot water, the rest of the family opened identical envelopes at the exact same moment. Heather's hand shook so badly she dropped hers on the kitchen island. Brody read the line that recognized Reese as his son and sat down hard on one of the bar stools he used to brag about importing from Italy. Dean stared at the paragraph that stripped him of the voting shares he thought were his birthright. Kendall started crying again when she realized the venue she had already sent save the dates for belonged exclusively to the sister she had spent years pretending was invisible. The first Tuesday in October, the sheriff's sale notice was taped to the front door of the Lake Lanier house in bold red letters no one could miss. The auction took place on the courthouse steps in Cumming on a Tuesday morning that felt more like winter than fall. The property sold for $4.35 million to a cash buyer from Charlotte, who planned to tear down the guest wing and add a helipad. Brody stood on the sidewalk across the street in a suit that no longer fit quite right, watching strangers walk through rooms he had once called his kingdom while the moving trucks waited in the driveway. Heather stayed in the car with the windows up, sunglasses on, even though the sky was overcast. Dean and Kendall had already left town the week before, unable to face the neighbors who used to wave from golf carts, and now pretended not to see them. They moved into a 3-bedroom apartment off Old Milton Parkway, the kind of place with beige carpet and a pool that smelled like chlorine and broken dreams. Harper Homes became Horton Communities' Georgia division overnight. 200 employees kept their jobs under new ownership. Only the old executives were gone. Country club memberships quietly expired without renewal notices. Brody spent his days driving aimlessly along the same back roads he used to close million-dollar deals on, stopping at gas stations that still took cash because his credit score had fallen below 500. Dean took a sales job at a used car lot in Roswell and learned what it felt like to be the one begging for commission. Heather and Kendall stopped speaking entirely after a screaming match in the apartment parking lot that ended with Heather telling her daughter the wedding would have happened if she had ever learned the difference between wanting and deserving. Kendall moved to Nashville with whatever fiancé money she had left and changed her last name on social media the same week. I spent one afternoon at the bank with Wells Carter signing the final paperwork that transferred every remaining joint account, every trust distribution, every dormant college fund into structures they could never touch again. I closed the doors on 9 years of invisible support and walked out without looking back. No letters, no explanations, no second chances. The phone numbers I had known since childhood went straight to voicemail boxes that were never set up. The family group chat dissolved into gray bubbles and exited participants. The lake house became someone else's future, while the people who had lived there became ghosts in a town that had once treated them like royalty. Alpharetta society moved on quickly. Invitations stopped arriving. The charity galas found new table sponsors. The neighbors who once borrowed the boat for weekend parties now crossed the street when they saw Brody coming. The name Harper still appeared on a few subdivision signs, but no one claimed it anymore. I changed every password, every beneficiary, every emergency contact, and when the last form was notarized, I deleted the old family photos from my phone, the ones where I was always standing slightly outside the frame. Some doors once closed, stay that way. The Christmas after the sale arrived soft and bright, the kind of Georgia winter day that feels more like early spring than the end of December. Reese and I spent the morning in the kitchen of the new house I had bought on the north end of Lake Lanier, a smaller place with wide windows and a dock that actually belonged to us, no ghosts attached. We argued good-naturedly over whose turn it was to stir. The gravy laughed when the dog stole an entire stick of butter off the counter and set only 2 places at the table, because 2 was finally enough. There were no designer trees, no catered trays, no forced smiles for photographs that would later be cropped to exclude someone. Just a simple roast, a bottle of decent red, and music playing low while snow flurried against the glass. For the first time in my life, Christmas felt quiet in the way peace is supposed to feel. Across town, the old life had settled into its final shape. Brody now worked security at a warehouse off McFarland Parkway, wearing a Navy uniform with his name stitched crookedly on the chest, checking delivery trucks in and out under fluorescent lights that never quite warmed the concrete floors. Dean sold extended warranties at a dealership in Buford, standing under strings of plastic pennants that snapped in the wind while he tried to convince retirees they needed gap coverage. Heather had taken a part-time job greeting customers at the cosmetics counter in the Alpharetta Nordstrom, smiling through the same perfume samples she once bought by the case, her name tag reading only Heather H, because the full version no longer opened doors. Kendall's wedding never happened. The deposits were lost. The fiancé quietly disappeared, and she now rented a one-bedroom in Midtown Nashville, where she posted sponsored content about budget beauty dupes to an audience that had shrunk to a fraction of its former size. The country club set erased them the way people erase anything that might reflect badly on the group photograph. Invitations stopped coming. The lake house neighbors who once fought for a seat at their 4th of July party now looked through them in the grocery store. Old friends crossed the street rather than risk an awkward conversation about money or reputation. The Harper name still appeared on a handful of faded subdivision signs around Forsyth County, but no one claimed it anymore, and children too young to remember the old days asked why the signs looked so tired. I heard these things the way you hear distant thunder, unmistakable, but no longer threatening. I never sought the details out. They simply drifted in through mutual acquaintances who thought I might want to know, or through public records anyone could pull with a few clicks. I never answered. I never reached out. I never felt the need. Reese and I finished dinner, carried our coffee to the porch, and watched the last light fade over the water. He asked once quietly whether I ever missed them. I thought about it for a long time, about the years I spent paying for a life that never included me, about the invitations that never carried my name, about the way they taught me early that love could be conditional and still call itself family. I looked at the single string of white lights we had hung along the railing, at the dog asleep on my feet, at the man beside me who had chosen to stay when everyone else walked away, and I realized the answer was simpler than I once believed. Real family is not the people who share your blood. Real family is the people who choose to stay when the money disappears, when the cameras stop flashing, when there is nothing left to gain and everything to lose. Real family is the person who shows up with grocery store champagne and still thinks you are worth celebrating. I have that now. They never did. There is no dramatic reconciliation waiting around some future corner. There are no tearful phone calls, no deathbed confessions, no sudden realization that they were wrong. There is only the quiet certainty that some stories end exactly the way they need to, and the people who treated love like a limited resource finally ran out of it. To everyone who stayed until the very last word, thank you. Thank you for listening, for feeling this with me, for understanding that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is close the door and never look back. If this story hit something inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear they are allowed to choose themselves. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you most? How did you know it was time? You are worth more than the table scraps of someone else's affection. Never forget